the true capital cost, the true cost of ownership, and the operational efficiencies are not well understood. Yes, of course, wind farms will play a critical part in the process. They are not necessarily a complete answer. We are surrounded by sea in Britain, so it's no surprise that we spend a lot of time researching wave energy, and this is a prototype wave energy generation. You simply tow it out to sea and you leave it there with electric wire connecting back to the shore to a substation. In theory, it sounds immensely attractive. Again, the technical difficulties are such that the dialogue between our political leaders and our scientists and engineers has to be close and mutually understood. And of course, in somewhere like Malaysia or in Arizona or Australia, solar power can never be discounted, because lest we forget, the source of all of our energy on the planet, other than nuclear, is the sun. We have other problems. Transportation. We all take it for granted. I've just experienced for the first time your traffic jams in Kuala Lumpur, getting here this morning from Bangui. Here's what the IPCC showed in their fourth assessment report about the ratio of carbon originating from road transportation, rail, and sea. Sea was a surprise for me in this data, how small a contributor to our carbon budget is. Within road, the big red C of the left-hand side is light vehicles. Whether we like it or not, light vehicles, motor cars, are basically the main contributor to the transportation carbon budget on the planet. There's another problem, and this truly is international science diplomacy. This is, again, the number of vehicles per 1,000 population measured against GDP per capita in those countries. Unsurprisingly, you see the United States in the upper right-hand corner, a very wealthy nation, a very large nation geographically, and a nation with a high GDP per capita. What should concern the younger generation is that the titans of India and China economically, just emerging, China now the world's second largest economy, undoubtedly their people could and should aspire to the same quality and standard of living as America has habitually had for decades. What is going to happen to this graph when they have a vehicle ownership per capita of the same level of the United States of America? The results are obvious. We have to get smarter. I've been a fan of these objects for decades. Since I was a young lad, I went on motor courses taking engines of motor cars apart. This is actually an electric car. Now, electric cars in Britain we used to associate with a very clumsy vehicle that came along at 6 or 8 kilometers per hour in the mornings bringing milk to your doorstep, the electric vehicle. But this looks to me more like a Ferrari. But it's the technology of tomorrow, because the batteries that power the vehicle is still the technology of tomorrow. And I'm saying to myself, why? There are so many of you bright young people around. Why has nobody cracked this problem? Well, last year they sort of did. General Motors and Nissan both announced all electric vehicles. And for a moment I was inspired, thinking, at last, I had a eureka moment. They've cracked the problem. But if you scratch under the floor pan of the Leaf, you will find a huge array of lithium-ion cells. It's certainly an improvement on that milk float that came to our house when I was a boy. Is it really the solution to electric vehicles long term? I don't know. I traveled quite a lot to the Gulf, to Qatar, to Abu Dhabi, to Dubai, as I know many of you do. And I watched with interest the Abu Dhabi government's plans for Mazda, this science city just outside Abu Dhabi itself, which will be transport-free. It's not actually quite true, because there are going to be huge parking lots around the periphery of Mazda. But what is true is that Mazda is currently, as I speak, on hold because of the international financial crisis. I think it'll be restarted. I think it will indeed become a success. The university already exists. But even cities of the future like this have question marks hanging over them. Elsewhere in the Gulf, the board of W.S. Atkins that I sit on is responsible for a company that designs structures such as this. This is the World Trade Center in Bahrain. You'll see wind farms are put inside the Twin Towers. An even more futuristic design for Abu Dhabi shows tower, again, Twin Towers, this time with wind farms and solar photovoltaic cladding, which is makes a rather nice cladding on a building. In the UK, we're talking about whether we can even measure the carbon budget reliably and accurately. And we come back again always to the inevitable question whether the costs of mitigation dominate and therefore humanity will become economically poorer, or conversely, whether solving the problems of climate change might actually unleash a new industrial revolution. So, in conclusion, for a few slides, what do we do? What do we, members of the human race, actually do about this? There's an old English proverb, which I think, to me, is my definition of science diplomacy. A problem shared, if I share it with you, or with you, I have half the problem, you have half the problem. So these are problems that cannot be solved by individual nations. By definition, no African nation can solve its own food problems. The world must get together to solve those problems. Climate change can only be solved by getting together. So science diplomacy, paradoxically, unlike political diplomacy, knows no boundaries. We are bound together as humanity. And it's via a mutual understanding that that can come about, which is what, of course, diplomacy has always sought to bring about. And it seeks to provide solutions to what appear at first sight to be conflicting priorities, with, of course, the dominant conflicting priority being whether you can accomplish all of the above and still stimulate economic growth. Is that still a tenable proposition for the 21st century? I don't know the answer. What I do know is that I passionately believe in mutual understanding. This, and I have a copy here which I will leave, is the first volume in a series called the Atlas of the Islamic World of Science and Innovation. It is a project in which the Royal Society and a number of other learned organizations are partners with the Organization for the Islamic Conference, the OIC. Malaysia was the first study nation, and this volume was literally hot off the press on Friday of last week, and I brought some copies out with me. It's very important that we in England understand what you in Malaysia do, how you think, what your perception of science is, and what your traditions in science. Only then can science diplomacy flourish. Because science diplomacy flourishes in a very complex environment. This indeed is the report, President, that you referred to earlier. The complexity of the scientific roadmap internationally today, without even overlaying economics, is quite phenomenal. One of the main issues which we confront throughout the world to make science diplomacy flourish is, of course, human mobility. And I read with fascination Brain Gain Malaysia. I thought this was a brilliant idea. At the same time, paradoxically, the United Kingdom border agency responsible for those who come into the United Kingdom is raising question marks about how many scientists should be admitted. It's very easy to come to the United Kingdom if you're good at football. You can come and play for a football team next week. But apparently if you're a Nobel Prize winning scientist, it's more tricky. I support the Malaysian approach to this equation, and I'm concerned, and indeed the Royal Society has expressed its concern to our government. Human mobility in science diplomacy is essential. The final point I'd like to make before I wind up is that probably of all the things I have talked about this morning, the biggest challenge facing the younger generation today is how we manage the growing population on our planet. This is a rather interesting projection of the countries on the planet, slightly unfamiliar to you, but now color-coded and sized according to their populations. And it is a story that draws your immediate attention to India and China. that constitute 2/3 or thereabouts of the population of the planet. The issues are clear. All the while, science marches on. A report by our sister academy, the Royal Academy of Engineering, recently talks about synthetic biology, about humankind's ability now to create molecules, perhaps even components of living molecules, which are unknown in nature. Problems like this constitute ethical and scientific dilemmas which require, again, international understanding and diplomacy. But while science marches on, so does time. And I'll leave you with some thoughts from 2,500 years ago by the Greek philosopher Hippocrates, which I think are very appropriate to our younger members. Time is that wherein there is opportunity, but opportunity is that wherein there is no great time. On these grand challenges I've talked about, the clock is running. The situation is not improving. It is possibly getting worse. It will fall to you members of the younger generation to tackle these problems, and I wish you the very best of good luck and success in what confronts you. Thank you for the privilege of addressing you this morning. I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.